Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown. He is Eric Henry. We are still of Horns247.com. Of course, we are on location at SEC Media Days. We're in this swanky Omni Hotel where all of the SEC has been coming through talking football this week. We even got some nice music playing for you in the background. I want you to feel, totally relaxed and having fun here.
Right at home.
Right at home. Listening to us talk to you about SEC football, the Texas Longhorns. Eric, any quick thoughts about your first SEC Media Days?
Quick thoughts, Chip, is I want to take one of these chairs over. I know that much.
They're like made of gold.
The gold chairs, nice little ambiance here. Listen, who said we can't have nice things here at the Flagship podcast? No, all jokes aside, SEC Media Days, Chip, and I know you covered it last year, but it's been a great event. I mean, no shade to the way that any of the other leagues have done things, but this has been top notch. When it comes to the media events, I know we've certainly had plenty of time to enjoy ourselves, and just the way they handle the players, it's a really streamlined process, a lot of access. So I think we've got a lot of good stuff to bring back to the 40 acres. And hey, go to horns247.com because we're going to keep filing reports all throughout the rest of this week and what we've been able to glean here in Dallas.
Well, we have to be body languageologists. We have to be confidence-ologists here at SEC Media Days because it's almost like a pre-fight weigh-in where, it's a little bit of a stare down, even though the teams aren't like literally staring each other down. But you want to hear who's feeling good, look in their eyes, look in these players' eyes, especially the quarterbacks, see where they are. And obviously we'll start off with the Texas Longhorns because, Texas, Oklahoma, the new kids on the block here in the SEC. And Eric, I thought Steve Sarkisian got things off to a strong start. He said, listen, not to take anything away from the SEC, but we're here to win a conference title and we're here to win championships, which, hey, man, let them know. Let them know. And Quinn Ewers, I thought he shows up in a cowboy hat. He's got the black, shiny Lucchese cowboy boots, a belt buckle, big enough to eat a steak off.
Don't forget about that belt buckle, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. I thought he sounded and, looked really had the swagger of a quarterback expecting to do big things.
No, listen, I would agree. I'll start with Steve Sarkisian first. You talked about the fact that he sounded confident. We'll get into a little bit of that, in the take it or leave it portion. But one thing to me that stood out, I thought was key, right? And we've talked about it a lot in terms of the schedule, right? And, guys like us who cover college football have said, that schedule, man, you even thought that Texas should buy the SEC a couple steak dinners for the way that schedule worked out. But Steve Sarkisian came out and said, listen, we have to earn everyone's respect in the SEC. Kirby Smart, a line, a little quip, but I'm not going to be able to quote it verbatim, but the gist of it was, you can be humbled any week.
Humility is a week away in the SEC.
I'm glad you remembered it verbatim, right? He certainly knows. He's been there, done that as far as taking a team to the pinnacle, that being a national championship. So I like that Steve Sarkisian mentioned that, right? Because the fact that, listen, yes, you're going to play Vandy, you're going to play Arkansas, you're going to play Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Florida. For all intents and purposes, right, those are, we'll say, kind of the bottom of the barrel SEC teams, right? But and if Texas is as good as we believe they are, they'll handle business. But you have to go into it with a healthy amount of respect for your opponent because you can be beat on any given day. So that is kind of my major takeaway, starting off with Steve Sarkisian. Now, Quinn Ewers, I know he was your focus throughout the day, but just going back and reading some of the transcripts, what I like, and Steve Sarkisian mentioned this, is the way he walks into the facility, right? And I would love to ask Quinn this, maybe, when we get back to Austin for Texas Media Days, team specific, but when does it click, right? We talk a lot about when it clicks on the field. When does it click? And Chip, this, when you walk into a college campus and you're 18, 19 years old, you're still finding yourself. You still necessarily know who you are as a person. When you're 21, 22, and you've been on campus and you've done your routine for a couple of years, you walk into the facility with an air of confidence. Not necessarily, again, just on the field, but Steve Sarkisian talked about, hey, he walks into the facilities. This is my team. This is my program. When did that happen? Right? Because having that level of confidence, those are all the things when we say, oh yeah, third year starting quarterback. That's part of it too. It's not just on the field, rapport with guys, Isaiah Bond and the new guys. It's third-year starting quarterback. This is my program. I don't have to, tiptoe around and the other veterans. No, this is Quinn's team, and this team is going to go as far as Quinn takes.
Yeah, and I think first of all, contract year.
You talked about it.
I love it. I love it when it's a contract year for players. And Kelvin Banks. I mean, Steve Sarkisian said, he was asked, why did you bring Kelvin Banks to SEC Media Days? He's a junior. And Sark said, because it's probably his last year with us. And he's worked his butt off, everything. Contract year for Kelvin Banks. Quinn Ewers was asked, does it feel like this is going to be your last year of college football? And he said, yeah, it does feel that way. Don't know what Jesus has in store for me, but it'd be kind of cool if it is my last year, right? And so contract year for Quinn Ewers. Jahdae Barron, who also came to SEC Media Days, definitely a contract year for him as a fifth-year senior. And back to your point on Quinn Ewers, there's no doubt that he and Steve Sarkisian got together, especially with all these newcomers at receiver. And there's going to be guys in that group trying to push ahead. And Ewers has to manage that. He's got to lead them until the coaches are in and around all the time. Right now in the summer, they can work with the players 2 hours a week. So interesting stuff. But Jahdae Barron talked about Quinn Ewers' leadership, said it's unbelievable how – and he said, and Arch Manning, which is interesting because those two work well together. And Arch he's got bonds with Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, the guys he came in with.
Sure.
And so he's developing a voice on this team because we know if Quinn Ewers has the season he wants to have and moves on to the NFL, it's Arch Manning's show, as at that point he'll be a third-year player in the program and he'll have a connection with all the players on the team. So it sounds to me, and what I've heard from team sources is the chemistry's been really good, the focus, the work. No one's getting, hey man, you're getting complacent. There's not that complacency check. We know Steve Sarkisian's been saying complacency is the devil. And he trotted out that obsessed line again.
He did.
Yesterday. Steve Sarkisian talking about there's an obsession on this team with getting better.
I'm glad that Sark addressed that, right? Because he talked about it. I think it may have been doing some, a national spot when he talked
February
about
7th.
It, right?
In the signing day in February.
And talking about that. But to put that obsession in context, and that's why, I don't want to get too far off topic on a tangent, but Steve Sarkisian is a really smart guy. Like, I don't think sometimes football coaches are smart football coaches, but, Sark is a smart guy overall. I like the way he elaborated on obsession and saying, hey, it was the players who kind of, in essence, put that into motion. The fact that right after the Sugar Bowl, guys are like, hey, let's get back in the weight. Let's get back out there on the field, conditioning, training, doing all of the things it takes because they got the taste, Chip. They got that little taste of being that close to playing for a national championship. And they know that it's going to take just that little extra effort. That's where the obsession comes in. Streamline focus on the task at hand. And that's playing for a national title. Of course, that starts playing in the SEC title. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But no, I like the way that Sark kind of rolled that out yesterday during media days.
Yeah, and I think you look at this team, it is built for now. Steve Sarkisian doesn't go into the portal and grab 3 players in the spring, 2 defensive tackles, and a corner if he's not ready to go compete for the SEC championship and a national championship right now. And he's built this program in the image of what he experienced at Alabama. He had a very clear plan to get bigger in the trenches, get faster on the outside. He's doing that. And he knows after losing Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, hey, we got to make sure we can stop the run. We got to make sure that we can get off the field and let this offense cook because the offense should be dynamite. Now, we've been having fun. Eric and I talked last week and take it or leave it about whether Quinn Ewers will get to 40 touchdown passes because that's kind of a magic number for Heisman Trophy finalists. Mac Jones threw for 40. Jaden Daniels threw for 40 last year. And And so, we'll see. There are some similarities to those Alabama offenses in 2019 and 2020 with the solid running back room. Alabama had Najee Harris at that time. And of course, the receiver room loaded with talent. Sark knows how to manage that. He's done it to the tune of 45 and 40, almost 48 points per game in the 2020 season. Not saying that's where Texas is, but Eric, they do have a veteran offensive line. They've got a veteran quarterback. They've got talent in the receiver room. Could we see just a big old breakout in terms of points production? I don't know. What do you think?
Chip, again, it's so funny you mentioned that, right? Because early in their offseason, we were talking about, is this the year that, Quinn Ewers throws for this, or the year that they top 40 points, right? And you take a look at Steve Sarkisian's averages at Texas, right there in that 35 point per game mark each year. But I will say this. I went back and I was like, hey, let's just take a look at the trends. That's what matters to me, Chip, is we can sit here and speculate about this, that, and the other. The trends show and reveal who you are. Steve Sarkisian is a guy, for all the pomp and circumstances about how much of a creative play caller he is and the things he likes to do, he's an old school minded coach who's going to run the football. Only once in his head coaching career, his first year in Washington, 2009, was the only season that his team's averaged more passes per game than rushing attempts per game. Even those 2019 and 2020 years in which those offenses were outstanding, in 2020, the year they averaged 48 points per game, it was 36.4 rushes per game and 32 and change, 36.8 rushes and 32.8 passes per game, right? So leaning on the run heavily. Matt Jones, remember, threw for 4,500 yards that year, right? So even the fact that they were quote unquote balanced or even trending more towards the run doesn't mean that you can't get the receivers involved, get those guys their numbers and their touches, right? So that to me, I think is the ideal. That's the archetype for this year's Texas team, those 2019 and particularly that 2020 year. And I'll come out and say it, right? I've talked about Quinn Ewers, I think, being the best quarterback in the SEC. I think Quinn Ewers, from a physical perspective, is a better quarterback than where Mac Jones was then. Of course, Mac Jones was a first-round pick. Not even doing the revisionist history on where his NFL career is taking. I'm just saying, at those points in times in their career, I think Quinn Ewers is a better quarterback.
Right. So, it could be exciting year one in the SEC. There were some, Steve Sarkisian, everyone wants to know about the receiver rotation. He kind of doubled down that we're going to play a lot more receivers early, he said. And that's going to be their chance to prove to Steve Sarkisian that he can trust them, that Quinn can trust them, and that they're going to be where they're supposed to be. So let's see. We'll definitely hold the receipt on that.
Yeah.
See, okay, how many receivers are playing against Colorado State? How many receivers are playing against Michigan? That's the big question, because that game's going to test this Texas offense, because that Michigan defense does have a lot of key starters right up the middle of the defense coming back. Steve Sarkisian talked about the fact that he feels really good about the 3 spring transfers he brought in, Bill Norton, Jermaine Lole, and Javion Cole. When he talked about Javion Cole, he talked about instincts. He said, this guy may not have the longest arms. He may not be the fastest guy, but sometimes instinct overtakes all that. And I thought it was interesting that Jahdae Barron said, this guy has amazing feet and he's twitchy. That means he can run. That means he can turn and run, and he's a cover corner. And that's what Steve Sarkisian called him. He's a true cover corner. That's exciting news, because they need a field corner.
No, it's funny, because I was just going to say, when you talk about someone who's just a true cover corner, you can say that was one of the things that maybe was missing. And listen, injuries play a factor, right? I mean, Jahdae Barron was not his best due to the ankle, and Ryan Watts, guys were banged up. So you should state that. But that's got to make Texas fans salivate, hearing that Javion Cole is a true cover corner, a guy that we can put out there, blanket some of these targets in the SEC and say, hey, go do your thing, right? That is huge. And I've talked about, when I talked with his defensive coordinator, Cal Poly, Cody Van Oppen plenty of times, but Cody just raved about the fact, he's like, listen, this kid, it was not a measure of talent. It was not a matter of anything as far as attitude. It just was playing high school football in Oakland, not necessarily the highest recruited area there. He was 17 years old, maybe a little physically underdeveloped, but was adamant that Texas had a guy who would walk in and be ready to play even at that level. And that's really what stood out to me. And his track record shows it, Chip.
Right.
He shows up as a 17-year-old, has 2 interceptions in his second career game. He shows up, makes the leap from FCS to FBS, is the highest rated cornerback in the Mountain West, and would have been the highest rated cornerback, for Pro Football Focus in the SEC, right? So someone who, no matter what the level of competition is, he's shown up and played, and that's huge.
Yeah, and highest rated cornerback returning in the SEC, according to Pro Football Focus, with a overall grade of 86.2. All right, a couple other things, Eric, that we heard from. So Quinn Ewers, a Georgia reporter came right after him on, okay, you said Texas is going to be, everyone's biggest game this season. He's like, there's some Georgia fans who are going to take issue with that. And he's like, well, okay. He's like, what I was talking about is everyone's going to give us their biggest shot because we're the new kids in the SEC. And he said, we're going to be one of everyone's biggest games for sure. I mean, most of the projections have Georgia at number 1, and Texas at number 2.
Yeah. Chip, listen, it's a fair question by the reporter, but let's not,
let's not get hung up on.
Let's not get hung up on it. A, you knew what Quinn meant, and B, Chip, he's right. Quite frankly, it's semantics. Whether you want to go biggest game, whatnot. Texas is a brand, Chip. We saw what happened when they left the Big 12. This was before Texas was a 12-win team. Everyone wanted to go out and say, okay, we want to be the ones to knock off Texas. It's foolish to think that that's going to change in the SEC. I don't care if it's Vanderbilt, if it's Colorado State. They all are going to want to be the team to knock off Texas. That's no shade on what Kirby Smart has done at Georgia. They've accomplished a ton, right? I mean, that's no disrespect to them. But Texas, just as a name, it's the same way that if an SC or a Michigan or, even like Notre Dame, Miami back in their heyday, right? Like, there's no doubt that teams are going to want to throw their best shot at Texas. So it's a fair question by the reporter, but that's semantics in terms of the wording, to act as if every team on the schedule isn't going to see Texas and be like, all right, it's Texas week. We want to have a little more swagger at our step. We want to be the ones to knock off the champ. That's come on.
If players and teams could dial it up that easily, there'd be a lot more top ranked, teams every year. But I think it's interesting. A&M, of course, came up, and the return of the rivalry. They're going to be in College Station. Quinn Ewers was asked about it, and he said, yeah, super excited about the return of that rivalry, especially with it being at Kyle Field. Now, that is going to be one of the craziest environments you've ever seen. I don't know that these players they were at Bryant-Denny last year, and the roof was coming off that place in the fourth quarter. Kyle Field's going to be absolutely bonkers, but Steve Sarkisian said, we'll be ready. He continues to say, we'll be ready. He even kind of laughs like, we'll be ready. So we know what happened when they went to Arkansas in 2021. They weren't ready. That was not his team. It was his first year, and they got ambushed. But everyone who's, excited about the return of that game, Steve Sarkisian says they'll be ready.
Well, Chip, this is kind of where my thought goes, right? And of course, an environment like that, you can't really experience it until you're there on the turf. The crowd is going crazy. I'm sure they're going to do everything to rile up the crowd. You can't really experience that until you're there. Jahdae Barron said something that was interesting. You talk about that 2021 game in Arkansas. Listen, Jahdae's never lacking confidence, right? You know that about Jahdae. But he said, in kind of that classic Jahdae's one, it's like, yeah, I like that atmosphere. I think there are a lot of players on this team who are going to embrace that and say, I like that. I like the fact that you want to knock us off. And this is something that jumps out to me, and I'll let you kind of, confirm whether you think this plays a factor or not. But there are a lot of Texans on this team, a lot of the Texas kids. And sure, it's been many years since Texas and Texas A&M played on the gridiron. Some of these kids were probably elementary school, or not probably, they were elementary school the last time they played. But I'm sure they all know what A&M represents, what A&M means. I don't think there's anyone who the stage, I don't think will be too big for them. Can they truly feel what it will be like on Kyle Field until you get there? No. but the stage won't be too big because this team has gone to Bryant-Denny. They're going to go to Michigan. They're going to play in hostile environments. So I think they'll be ready.
Yeah, it's going to be a fantastic atmosphere. A lot of Texas fans. I have not been to the new Kyle Field since it was expanded to over 102,000 fans, and we all know that they just set the record for that George Strait concert with 111,000 people. So
shout out to George Strait, but not 111. That's amazing.
Guy,
Let's face it.
70 plus years old doing stadiums. Come on, George Strait, you got this. All right, a couple other things. Kelvin Banks.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't get to spend a lot of time with Kelvin Banks because I was with Quinn Ewers, but everyone told me just how polished he sounded, because in the past he was kind of like, hey, I'm here, we're doing media. He sounded like a guy heading into a contract year. Eric?
Well, the thing about Kelvin, if you listen, Kelvin has a great personality, big kid, good, big smile, like, hey. And I think part of that shift just comes to the fact that offensive linemen, super smart guys, really intelligent guys to play on the line, but, they're not always the most desired when it comes to media, right? So that certainly plays a factor. But, Kelvin, as we talked about, this has got to be training for him because he's going to be doing this a lot coming to the NFL and when his career kind of takes off past Texas. So not a real shock there. And Kelvin, was never a bad speaker. He just kind of sounded like a happy guy to be talking to people, right? So not too shocked that he's polished. And I to be honest, the thing that stands out for me with Banks is just the attitude, right? Again, I didn't spend a ton of time as well. I was with Jahdae Barron. I went back and read some of the quotes. He's taking it. If there was ever a critique, and listen, you don't play offensive line, you don't get to be a 5-star left tackle if you don't have that mean, nasty physical bone about you, right? But if there was ever a critique about Kelvin, you can say maybe to be a little bit of that jerk, right? Be a little bit of a we're going to keep it a PG podcast, but Kelvin's talked about
nasty,
a little bit of a hard butt, and I think going back and reading the quotes, at least it seems as Kelvin's kind of embracing that because he knows what it's going to take to be in the SEC as well. So all positive signs there in my mind.
And Texas has not had a first-round draft pick on the offensive line since 2002. So Kelvin Banks expected to change that come April of 2025. All right, Eric. A couple other things. How about we'll shift gears. Anything else from Texas before we move on to what we've heard from Georgia and Alabama and some of the others this week?
No, we'll move on.
All right. So Georgia, obviously, is they're 42-2 the last 3 seasons.
Insane.
I mean, it's amazing what Kirby Smart has done there. They might have been the best team in the SEC last year, but it didn't play out that way. They lose to Alabama in the SEC championship game, and they get left out of the playoff. They're a team with a chip on their shoulder because they didn't get into the playoff. And they're 42-2, and they were the 2-time defending national champion. So this is going to be fantastic. I mean, we know that Texas is going to play Oklahoma on October 12th and then come home and play Georgia on October 19th. That is the stretch that everyone is looking at to see if Texas is truly SEC ready, because I talked to Chris Doering, former Florida receiver under Steve Spurrier, who's now with SEC Network, and he said, that's what I got to see. I got to see if Texas can do those back-to-backs, because in the SEC, he said that's the biggest difference, is that every week it's a war, and your guys have to be ready for the mental and physical demands of playing against the best athletes, the best teams in the country.
Chip, there's 2 directions I want to go with that. One, you talked about it. That is why everyone asked the question, is Texas SEC ready? But as we alluded to the schedule, yes, you want to have a healthy confidence for those teams. But I will say it until I am blue in the face. If this year's Texas team, Chip, is the team that we believe them to be, they'll handle business against Arkansas. They'll handle business against Florida, because just call a spade a spade. Those teams aren't as talented as Texas. But it is what it is, right? No disrespect to them. They're not as talented. They have a stretch, as we talked about. Oklahoma, Georgia. I think the guys have to be ready to embrace that. The schedule sets up in a way where they get a bye week prior, right? They get Mississippi State prior to that, right? So, the week 2, you go to Michigan, and then you come home, you have UTSA, and then Mississippi State. You feel, at least I feel, I shouldn't speak for, but I feel as if that sets up really well for them to handle that 2 intense mentally draining, physically draining contests in a 14-day span, I think that sets up well. Now, the second direction that I'll take that in is this. With Georgia, Chip, a champion's confidence. That's what stood out to me. There's a measure of been there, done that. We don't have to go out and beat our chests or say anything crazy. We know what it takes because we've been to the mountaintop. We've been there before, whether it was from Kirby Smart all the way down. I think that's what stood out to me. And sure, some of that probably trickles down from, the Nick Saban. And Chip, side note, how much reverence did we hear from really all the coaches for Nick Saban?
Yeah, because Nick was sitting in the back of the room working for ESPN.
So that stood out to me. But yeah, just that champion's confidence from the players. So we don't have to say anything brash. We don't have to, be tense or tight. We've been there and done that. And that's something that Texas, if they are going to accomplish things they want to accomplish this year, they'll have to walk through the fire in those trials and tribulations. But it's set up well in my mind.
Yeah, no, it does. And remember, Georgia will have played Clemson and Kentucky and Auburn before they play Texas. So we'll have, Steve Sarkisian will have some really good film of Georgia having to, extend itself. And Texas will have a very clear picture of what Georgia is all about with Carson Beck and whether his receiving core is what they want it to be. One thing I thought Kirby Smart said this week was really interesting. He got asked about all of the issues with the kids on the Georgia team still, driving too fast and risking their lives, others' lives. And he talked about maybe we're to a point of finding players. If we're going to pay them NIL, should we be finding them? And he might have a point, but that brings us more into the line of contracts and employees. And we know it's already professional. It's the farm system of the NFL. But I thought that was interesting.
Listen, I understand Kirby Smart being defensive. You heard that. There was also a quote that I read where he said, listen, 90% of our guys are doing the right thing. And it's true, right? It's not a football roster, upwards of 110 to 15 guys. The majority of them are trying to toe the line and do the right thing. You got a couple guys who are young and making mistakes. And I do think, Chip, the finding aspect is interesting. And maybe I'm just a savage. I think whether it's the Ollie Gordon situation or the drag race and whatnot, kids are going to mature. Chip, you're a father. Kids are going to mature at different rates, right? We know that. But just sit some of these kids down in front of a family that's lost, right? And if that can't shake you, I don't know what will. Because guess what? A fine ain't going to do it. If the living reality of what those consequences can result in won't shake you, I don't know if money's going to do it, but who knows? That could be the direction we go in. But I hesitate to come down and bash these kids at times because they are kids. Chip, we're around them probably more than the average fan, and sometimes they'll do things to remind you that they're still children. But with the responsibility and the finances that come with this, you do have to step up and mature. Hopefully, his kids will do that.
Yeah,
the small amount of kids.
Yeah, the other thing that Kirby Smart said I thought was really funny, he said, we did an off-season study of Nike because we like to study companies and people who've been successful. He said, I've had a chance to get to know Phil Knight and his wonderful wife, Penny. He said, I'd like to get some of that NIL money Phil is given to Dan Lanning at Oregon, and then he brought it up a couple times throughout his SEC media interviews. Of course, Dan Lanning used to be the defensive coordinator at Georgia under Kirby Smart, and everybody knows Oregon's all in to win it all this year. So is Ohio State. That's what's going to make this this college football season so interesting and so compelling. Okay, so we heard from Kalen DeBoer with Nick Saban's everywhere around here, and Kalen DeBoer comes in. He is so comfortable in who he is, Eric. Now, part of it is because he's like got this crazy record of 100 something wins and 11 losses as a head coach. Of course, some of that was at Sioux Falls, but hey, man, you win championships wherever you are. And then he goes to Washington and is playing for the national championship last year. He seems really comfortable with who he is. He's recruiting well. Jalen Milroe sounds confident. I mean, Alabama, what are we expecting from Alabama?
Chip, really quick on Kalen DeBoer, right? As someone who's covered the quote-unquote lower levels when I spent time at Group of Fives, right? When you're a guy like Kalen DeBoer, who worked his way up from Sioux Falls, you coach at the NAIA and Division III and Division II, you work your way up, right? I couldn't help but feel like this was just the right choice to replace a legend, because it's a tall task when you're asking someone who's, maybe a young rising assistant, right, to step in, because you're still finding yourself as a coach. You're still figuring out, like, hey, do I have the chops? Maybe you've had success at one.
And if you're asking that question, you're not ready.
You're not ready, right? And if maybe you've had success at one stop, but it's like, oh man, this is Alabama, right? No, Kalen DeBoer is a guy who tried and true. No matter, like you said, no matter the level, you've been a winner. That stuff matters. And as far as the Alabama players, Jalen Milroe, it's interesting. We talk a lot about
former Texas commit.
We talk a lot about the big three as far as quarterbacks, right? We look at it as Quinn Ewers, we got it as Carson Beck, we got it as Jackson Dart. That guy, Jalen Milroe, earned my respect because he was put into a tough situation, Chip. You go back and you look at it, hindsight being 2020, I think we can all admit, those of us who watch a ton of college football, that offense wasn't tailored for Jalen Milroe early on. That was the Tyler Buckner offense, right? And you think you're going to get, of course, the common link there being Tommy Rees, and you get a transfer. It was clear that Jalen Milroe was kind of a square peg in a round hole. He gets benched. Alabama barely squeaks out a win at South Florida, a South Florida program that had been horrible for years. I'm not just taking that shot as a UCF alum. Nevertheless, they've been bad. And then he rebounds and ends up having I'd say a better than solid, a really excellent year as a starting quarterback. Love the air of confidence. He's growing into himself as well. So Jalen Milroe is a guy who, again, we talk about that big three. He's going to be knocking on the door saying, hey, I think I'm a pretty darn good quarterback myself. And just even from, Tyler Booker, I had a chance to talk with him. Really complimentary to the Texas defensive line, even saying that beyond Sweat and Murphy, saying that guys like Alfred Collins and Vernon Broad felt like those guys, there was no drop-off, right? They just were coming at you in waves. But Alabama, again, you can't quite say a champion's confidence because it's not quite the Georgia level. But those guys understand. They're not running from it. They know what the expectations are at Alabama. And it's been interesting to see how things play out with them.
Yeah. I totally agree. You mentioned Jackson Dart. Ole Miss is another program that is all in. And they hit the portal. 19 of their 22 starters are transfers over the last few years into that program. Eric, they've got 10 starters back on offense, 10 starters back on defense. They've got all the talent you could want. If they don't win it this year, then they may never win it. But their schedule's very favorable. They get Georgia in Oxford. They don't have much heavy lifting early in their schedule. Ole Miss is fascinating. Texas does not play Ole Miss, so we'll, see this. There could be a log jam of teams at 10-2. Who knows? By the way, Greg Sankey said they're still working on the tiebreaker. It's going to have like 8 components. And
Chip, really quick, as someone who covered a league when they expanded and they were still working on the tiebreaker, I'm not comparing the SEC to Conference USA. I think that they'll get it together. But this gives me a little bit of pause because it's like you guys had a lot of time to work. It's like you knew you were going to 16.
Right. And now they're going to have one more conference call with the athletic directors, and they can approve that tiebreaker at any point between now and the beginning of the season. But Ole Miss, Eric, is this the year that Lane Kiffin shows he can win the big game?
Well, it's interesting with Lane, right? And Lane is such a unique guy, unique personality. This was not a coincidence, Chip. How many times did you hear him use the words free agency?
Yeah. Yeah, he likes to cut right to it.
Lane will just say, hey, we're not going to beat around the bush, free agency, right? And then he made a little crack about, paying players and negotiating and things like that. So, no, with Lane Kiffin, no one's ever doubted his ability as a football coach. coach, obviously the son of a football coach. Rest in peace to Monty Kiffin. But no one's ever doubted his ability as a football coach. But you got to go out there and show and prove, right? The same way Steve Sarkisian had to answer the question, 7-win Sark, right? Had to answer those questions last year. Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, he's never had success on the power football level, right? Obviously won 2 conference titles at Florida Atlantic, but he's got a lot of questions to answer. And I think this is a year that's really interesting. You talk about the schedule sets up well for them. I'm a big Jackson Dart guy. I think Jackson Dart, from a physical perspective, they get Trey Harris. They make some additions as far as getting that backfield. A Rashad Amos from Miami of Ohio was a 1,000-yard rusher there, a P5 bounce back. So
I got my man Ulysses Bentley from SMU. Bentley,
they've got plenty of talent there on that offense, so definitely want to keep an eye on them as well.
Yeah. And Walter Nolan, they got the big defensive tackle from Texas A&M. They should be strong all through that defense. Okay, Texas A&M. Mike Elko, he's kind of a meat and potatoes guy, but his defense, I think, is going to be really good. Eric, I mean, no one's talking about Nick Skuriton, the outside linebacker they brought in from Purdue, who's just a tackling machine. I think A&M is going to be really tough on defense. What we're all waiting for is how is Connor Wegman going to gel with Colin Klein? How does Colin Klein, who's typically worked with dual threat quarterbacks, how does he make it work for Connor Wegman, who's athletic but a pocket guy?
First off, I know I'm getting old because I still think of Colin Klein. I still think of the guy who was running around being a hell of a dual threat quarterback in his own right.
I called him a crash test dummy. They ran him so much. I mean, Bill Snyder. I called it the quarterback crash test dummy offense because I felt bad for Colin Klein. I'm like, how's he still standing the way that Snyder ran him so much?
But no, in terms of the offense, we'll see how the kind of adaptation works with Connor Wegman, because you have someone who is a talent, but again, is a situation of square peg round hole. I'm a big believer, Chip. This is where coaches have to earn their money, right? You have a talent. While maybe not necessarily the guy for your system, this is who you have right now, and you want to compete immediately in the SEC. Mike Elko doesn't want to, wait around and watch Texas have a great year and they're, going 5-7 or 6-6, whatever it may be. So we're going to have to find a way to make that work. You talked about Nick Skuriton. Ironically, I just filled out my SEC media ballot, have him among my top players there on the edge. So we all know that there are pieces in place, enough pieces for A&M to come out and be competitive immediately. I don't think so. We've seen crazier things happen, but
they open with Notre Dame at Kyle Field, and that is going to be so telling.
It's to be telling because you'll have a really good idea of your football team in week 1, right? You'll know, hey, this is where we are. It's not like you're going out and beating up against, no disrespect to the Bearcats, Sam Houston State, right? Like, you're going to face a real football team. And if you get beat up on, you'll say, oh, well, maybe this rebuild's a little bigger than I think.
And the quarterback at Notre Dame, Riley Leonard, was Mike Elko's quarterback at Duke last year.
Riley Leonard's a hell of a quarterback.
He is a hell of a quarterback. He makes things happen. That guy has a will to survive. And as anyone who watched the Duke Notre Dame game last year, Riley Leonard should have been off the field when he got injured.
Listen, I remember that. You remember just randomly, you remember the post-game interview with Sam Hartman? Sam Hartman, you could really tell he wanted to just go check on Riley Leonard, right? Because it was
horrible ankle injury. Yeah, it was something. It's gonna be fun because in the SEC it just means more.
It just means more.
All right, you ready for some take it or leave it?
I am ready for some take it or leave it, Chip.
Okay, well then we'll be right back with some take it or leave it, your favorite part of the show. All right, and don't forget to like and subscribe the Flagship podcast right there. Give us a thumbs up. That always helps. And if you're so inclined, give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to us. We appreciate you so much. All right, Eric, it is time for everyone's favorite part of the show. Take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it, number 1. Steve Sarkisian sounded overly confident at SEC Media Days. Take or leave it, CBD.
I don't think he sounded overly confident. I think he sounded confident.
Sure.
So I'm going to leave this. I like that Steve Sarkisian, again, is always talking about winning championships. you get what you demand of your players. And if you set the mindset, they take on that mindset. And so, he did say, not to take anything away from the SEC, we're coming into this conference to win the conference title and to win championships. Loved it. How about you?
Chip, Steve Sarkisian said the standard is the standard, right? Standard is the standard at Texas. You have to respect him for wanting to achieve great things. I don't have an issue with that. But as I said in the open, I really appreciate the fact that he also said you got to have a healthy respect for all of these teams because you can get beat. And it's not necessarily shade on the Big 12 as a whole, as much as just the gauntlet of this league. That's what I think people miss out on. We're not comparing the bottom half of the SEC to maybe some of the teams in the Big 12 saying, oh, there's some massive talent gap. It's the gauntlet of having to go through and do it. So anyhow, that's just my long-winded way of saying I do not think he was overly confident. I think he struck the right tone, so I'm leaving that.
Yeah, you better have some confidence in this league. All right, Eric, take it or leave it. Number 2, Kalen DeBoer will pick up where Nick Saban left off at Alabama, which would mean like 11-win seasons. A 10-2 season it's kind of a rough season at Alabama. Take it or leave it.
I'm glad you added that addendum because I was going to ask you. If you're saying where he left off, and you forget Alabama had a nice year last year. They had pretty darn good.
11-1. Who was the one?
Texas. I am going to leave this, but not saying that there's going to be some huge drop off. I just think year one, there's going to be inevitably some growing pain. It's a new coach, it's new voices, it's a new way of doing things, it's a new system. However, the standard as a standard can also be applied to Alabama. They've got everything in place, right? Now, granted, Nick Saban helps make that mystique, but in terms of year one, I'm going to leave that. But I love everything I've heard from Kalen DeBoer, and I do think he's the right guy to, in 2, 3, 4 years, have Alabama continue where Nick Saban left off.
Yeah. I think when I hear this, Kalen DeBoer will pick up where Nick Saban left off at Alabama, that makes me think about this year as opposed to the ability to sustain that incredible excellence that Nick Saban had for 17 years at Alabama, 6 national championships. Ridiculous.
Nick Saban has just opened up the light. The folks there at Alabama just want to shine the light just on us as we're talking about it.
I mean, look at that. The heavens are shining down because we're talking about Nick Saban. I'm going to leave this as well, but Kalen DeBoer is 3-0 against Dan Lanning, 2-0 against Steve Sarkisian. This guy loves the big game, loves the big moment. He didn't get the kind of performance from Michael Penix against Michigan that he got against Texas. So he misses out on a chance to win a national championship last year. But who had Washington playing for a national championship last year? Nobody.
Exactly.
Kalen DeBoer gets his players to believe. I don't think it's 2024 for him, but with a quarterback like Jalen Milroe, watch out, folks. Texas does not play Alabama in 2024. Okay, Eric and I are both leaving that, but
Georgia, take a leave at number 3. Georgia is the clear favorite to win the Southeastern Conference this year. Take it or leave it, Chip.
I'm going to take it because they're 42-2 the last 3 years. They got left out. They had an undefeated regular season last year and got left out of the college football playoff because they lost the SEC championship game to Alabama. And that SEC championship game, I hope it's a factor for Texas. We'll talk about that down the road. But in a league where you are so strong at the top, that SEC championship game, there are people making the argument you might be better off to be 10-2 and not play in that SEC championship game and then be fresh going into the college football playoff. Of course, it's a 12-team college football playoff this year. So I'm going to take this, Eric. How about you?
Chip, I'm taking it. just published on horns247.com, our 24/7 sports media poll of the SEC, where I picked Georgia to win the SEC. Just did my official Southeastern Conference media ballot. I picked Georgia to win the SEC. I am taking this, as I said, a champion's confidence. Texas has to go out and show and prove. It's not to say that Georgia doesn't have to go out and compete as well, but they've been there before. They've reached the mountaintop. And it's not like we're looking at a team that isn't equipped to compete. They are more than equipped to compete this year. I'm taking it.
Yeah. All right. Here we are. We're in our gold chairs. We're sad that we're going to be leaving our gold chairs, but we're very happy that you all spent some time with us today here listening to this episode, the SEC Media Days episode of the Flagship podcast. Remember to like and subscribe to the Horns 24/7 Flagship podcast YouTube channel, or Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. And until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. If you're not an annual member at Horns 24/7, what's going on? Texas is going into the SEC this year, kids, and they're winning every team sport imaginable. At least they did in the Big 12. So great time to become an annual member at horns247.com. We got baseball coverage. We got everything going on over there right now. All right, everybody, stay safe and keep the faith.